Dad stood at the wedding microphone, beaming. He said, "Everything I built, every dollar I saved, it was always meant for my real investment, Sarah." I was sitting at the back table, the one nearest the kitchen doors, my hand gripping a sealed envelope underneath. He had no idea what was inside that envelope, but in about 20 minutes, everyone in that ballroom would. My name is Colette. I'm 34 years old. I work as a pediatric occupational therapist in Richmond, Virginia. Every day I help kids with developmental delays learn how to hold a crayon, button a shirt, navigate a world that wasn't built for them. I love my job. But it took me a full decade to get here because the college fund that was supposed to carry me just disappeared one day. My dad is Raymond. He married my mom first, but she left when I was 7. And then came Denise, and with Denise came my half-sister Sarah. Sarah was the one they praised, pageant ready, sorority polished, could do absolutely no wrong. Every resource, every ounce of attention, every dollar in that house flowed in one direction, and it was never toward me. I wasn't the pretty one. I wasn't the poised one. I drove a 12-year-old Honda and ate rice and beans through grad school, but I had something none of them expected, and it had been sitting in a safety deposit box for 17 years. If you've ever had to build your whole life from scratch because the people who were supposed to help you chose someone else, subscribe. I see you. Drop your story in the comments because I promise you, I'm reading every single one. Let's get into this. When I was 17, I was a junior in high school, and I had a plan. Since I was a little girl, I'd been told that my grandpa Earl, my dad's father, had set up a college fund for me. $47,000. That was my ticket. I had applied to a competitive pre-med track program at Virginia Commonwealth University, and I believed, truly believed, that my future was secure. Then one evening, Dad sat me down at the kitchen table. Denise stood behind him with her arms crossed, leaning against the counter like she was supervising a business transaction. Dad cleared his throat. "We need to talk about that fund. Sarah's been accepted into a summer leadership institute at Duke. The tuition is steep, and we've decided to reallocate the money." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. "That's my money," I said. "Grandpa Earl set that up for me." Dad's expression went cold, not angry, just flat. Yea, like I was a clerk disputing a charge. "Your grandfather left it in my name. That means it's my decision. Sarah has potential that requires real investment. You're a hard worker, Colette. You'll figure it out." Then Denise leaned in with that syrupy voice she used when she wanted to twist the knife gently. "Sweetie, not everyone is meant for an expensive school. Community college is a perfectly fine path for someone like you." I found out later the full $47,000 had already been transferred into a new account under Sarah's name. It was done before they even told me. There was no discussion to be had. The next weekend I drove to the nursing home to see Grandpa Earl. He had early-stage dementia by then, but he still had lucid days, and that Saturday was one of them. I sat beside his bed crying, telling him everything. He listened without blinking. Then he grabbed my wrist with a strength that shocked me. His fingers were like iron. "The blue envelope," he said. "In my deposit box. Keys taped behind my bedroom mirror at the old house. Don't tell your daddy. Don't tell nobody." I drove to the old house that night. I found a small brass key taped exactly where he said it would be. But I was 17. I was scared. I was heartbroken. I tucked that key into my jewelry box, and I focused on surviving. Community college came first, then a transfer, then 2 jobs at the same time while clawing through my undergraduate degree, then graduate school, 10 years of grinding to become what I am today. And through all of it, I never opened that deposit box. My college graduation was the first time I realized they weren't just neglecting me, they were erasing me. I was 23. I had spent 6 years working and studying and scraping my way to a degree. I graduated summa cum laude. I sent invitations to everyone in the family: Dad, Denise, Sarah. I even wrote a personal note on Dad's invitation, telling him how much it would mean to have him there. The morning of the ceremony, I got a text. "Sorry, sweetheart. Sarah's event had a conflict. We'll celebrate another time. Sarah's sorority philanthropy gala. That's what they chose. They never did celebrate with me. Not a dinner, not a card, not a phone call. I walked across that stage in a rented gown, and the only person clapping for me was a coworker from the campus bookstore named Tamara, who barely knew my middle name. The applause from one person in a sea of hundreds is a sound you never forget, because it's the exact sound of being alone. And 6 years later, I was 29, and I had just earned my OTD, my Doctor of Occupational Therapy. At Thanksgiving that year, I mentioned it at the dinner table. I didn't make a speech. I just said it quietly while passing the cranberry sauce. Denise laughed mid-bite. Didn't even put her fork down. That's cute, but it's not like a real doctorate, is it? Sarah giggled into her wine glass. Dad said nothing. He just kept carving the turkey like I hadn't spoken at all. But across the table, I noticed my Uncle Gerald, Dad's brother, staring at Denise with a look of quiet fury. His jaw was tight, his knuckles were white around his napkin. He didn't say a word, but I could feel his anger from 6 chairs away. I stared at my plate and swallowed everything I wanted to say. Then came the manipulation. I was 32, at a family reunion, as I overheard a cousin congratulating Dad for putting both girls through school. I stopped walking. Dad smiled and accepted the praise without a single blink. He didn't correct it. He didn't flinch. He just said, "Family is everything." I pulled him aside behind the garage. My voice was shaking. "You told them you paid for my education?" He turned on me fast. "I kept a roof over your head. That counts. Don't embarrass me in front of people." I walked out of that reunion. I sat in my car in the gravel driveway with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, and for the first time in years, I thought about that brass key still sitting in my jewelry box at home. Through all of it, I want you to understand something. I wasn't destroyed. I was building. I had a career. I had a small condo with my name on the deed. And I was paying off my loans month by month. I was quiet, but I was not broken. Every time they pushed me down, I just kept crawling forward. Not because I had a plan, because I didn't know how to stop. After that reunion, something shifted inside me. I drove home, opened my jewelry box, and held that small brass key for the first time in over a decade. The next morning, I went to the bank. I gave them the key, signed the access form, and a clerk led me into the vault. Grandpa Earl's safety deposit box was small and dusty. Inside was a single large blue envelope sealed with red wax. My hands were trembling when I broke the seal. Inside, I found a notarized letter from Grandpa Earl, written when he was fully lucid, with a witness signature from a lawyer. The letter stated that the $47,000 fund was set up as an irrevocable educational trust, specifically and exclusively for Colette Marie Weaver. There was a clause, clear as daylight, stating that any reallocation of the funds without the beneficiary's written consent constituted a breach of fiduciary duty, and that Raymond, as trustee, could be held legally and civilly liable. Beneath the legal letter was a handwritten note on yellow-lined paper. I recognized Grandpa Earl's shaky cursive immediately. It read, "Baby girl, I always knew they'd try. This letter is your proof. Use it when you're ready. I love you, Grandpa." He had passed away 2 years before that moment. I held that letter against my chest, and I cried until the bank clerk knocked on the vault door to check on me. As I sat in that bank vault for 45 minutes just holding that paper, I didn't know when I'd use it. But then, 3 months later, the wedding invitation arrived, and I knew exactly when. Uncle Gerald called me 2 days after the reunion. His voice was low and steady, the way it always got when he was serious. "I saw what happened," he said. "I've been watching your father choose Denise's narrative for 20 years, and I'm done being quiet." Then he told me something that changed everything. Gerald was the witness who co-signed Grandpa Earl's trust letter. Earl had asked him to do it in secret years ago, knowing that Raymond would eventually redirect the money. Gerald said, Your grandpa saw this coming a mile away. He just didn't live long enough to fight it himself. Gerald helped me verify the letter's legal standing with a retired attorney friend of his named Wallace. Wallace reviewed every line. The document was ironclad. Meanwhile, Sarah's wedding was approaching like a freight train. She was marrying a young corporate attorney named Jordan, and the whole production was enormous. Dad and Denise had sunk over $60,000 into it. Crystal centerpieces, a 12-piece band, 5-tier cake. Sarah demanded I attend but assigned me no role. Not a bridesmaid, not a reader, not even an usher. I was seated at table 14, the overflow table by the service entrance, where the clatter of plates and the smell of industrial dish soap drifted through the swinging doors. Dad called me a week before the wedding, and his tone was the same one he used when I was 17. This is Sarah's day. Don't make it about you. Just smile and be grateful you're invited. I said, "Of course, Dad." I was calm. Too calm. Afterward, I called Uncle Gerald. "I'm not going to make a scene," I told him. "I'm just going to make sure the truth is in the room." There was a pause. Then Gerald said, "You want me there?" I said, "Front row." He said, "Done." The reception hall smelled like gardenias and expensive candle wax. 300 guests filled round tables draped in white linen. The band played soft jazz between courses. I sat at table 14 with distant cousins and a college friend of Jordan's who kept checking his phone. The blue envelope was in my lap under the tablecloth. Then Dad stood up. He walked to the microphone with that wide, generous smile he saved for audiences. He talked about Sarah like she was a miracle he'd personally engineered. He called her the greatest thing I ever invested in. He said he sacrificed everything for his daughters. Daughters, plural. He talked about how family always came first. My fingers tightened on the envelope. He ended with his voice cracking just slightly, the way it did when he wanted people to think he was emotional. "To my Sarah, everything I have, I built for you." The crowd erupted in applause. Then Uncle Gerald stood up from his seat in the front row. He straightened his jacket, walked to the microphone, and leaned in. "Raymond, that was beautiful. But I think there's one more piece of family history that deserves to be heard tonight." He looked across the room directly at me and nodded. I stood up. The room went quiet in patches, like a wave pulling back from shore. Denise saw me first. She hissed from the head table, "Sit down." I didn't stop. I walked past table 12, past table 8, past the ice sculpture and the towering cake. I reached the microphone. I didn't yell. I didn't shake. I spoke calmly. "I'm not here to ruin anyone's night, but my father just told this room he sacrificed everything for his daughters. I need to correct that, because 17 years ago, he took a trust fund that my grandfather set up for me, and he gave every dollar of it to Sarah without my knowledge or consent." I held up the notarized letter so the room could see the seal. "This is a legally binding trust document written by Earl Weaver, notarized and witnessed, naming me as the sole beneficiary. Dad had no legal right to move that money." Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Dad pushed his chair back and stood. "Colette, you're embarrassing yourself." I looked at him. "No, Dad, I'm finally telling the truth. You told the whole family you paid for my education. You didn't. I worked 2 jobs for 10 years. I paid every cent myself. And the money Grandpa left for me? It paid for Sarah's sorority dues, her car, her summer program. You stole from your own daughter." I turned to Sarah. Her face was pale, her bouquet trembling in her hands. "I don't blame you for what you didn't know, but you knew I was struggling, and you never once asked why." Sarah was frozen. Jordan stood slowly beside her, visibly disturbed, his attorney's eyes fixed on Raymond with a look that was already calculating. As I set the letter gently on the head table in front of them. "I've already filed a civil claim. You'll be hearing from an attorney. Congratulations on the wedding." I turned and walked out of that ballroom. Uncle Gerald was right behind me. The sound of the door closing behind us was the most satisfying sound I've ever heard. The wedding never recovered. The rest of that reception was a disaster in slow motion. The band kept playing, but nobody was dancing. Guests huddled in small clusters, whispering behind their champagne flutes, stealing glances at the head table where Raymond sat with his jaw clenched and his eyes fixed on nothing. Denise was beside him, furiously tapping on her phone, probably trying to do damage control that was already far too late. Jordan's family, attorneys themselves, were appalled. Yet his mother stood up from her seat, walked over to Jordan, and said something quietly in his ear. I heard later that she told him, "We need to look into this before you sign anything joint with these people." That's what happens when you build a family image out of lies. One envelope brings it all crashing down. Within a week, the trust letter had circulated through the entire extended family. Uncle Gerald made sure of that. He didn't do it with malice. He did it with copies. Clean, notarized copies mailed to every cousin, every aunt, every uncle who had ever believed Raymond's version of events. People who had congratulated my father for years. People who had nodded along at reunions when he talked about supporting both his girls, now held the truth in their hands. The phone calls started pouring in, not to Raymond, to me. The cousins I hadn't spoken to in years were calling to say they were sorry, that they had no idea, that they felt sick about the things they'd believed. Within months, the civil claim was settled. Raymond's attorney advised him not to fight it because the trust document was airtight. Wallace, Uncle Gerald's retired attorney friend, had made sure of that from the beginning. Raymond repaid $47,000 plus interest directly to me. He never apologized. Not once. He signed the check and had his lawyer deliver it. That told me everything I needed to know about who my father really was. Denise and Raymond's marriage cracked under the weight of all that exposure. The family they had spent decades performing for suddenly saw them clearly, and the view wasn't flattering. And I heard through Gerald that they started sleeping in separate rooms by autumn. Turns out a relationship built on lies doesn't survive the light very well. Sarah reached out to me 6 months later. Her voice was shaky on the phone. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't known about the trust, and I believed her on that part. But I also told her what I'd held inside for years. You didn't know about the money, but you watched me struggle, Sarah. You saw me working doubles. You saw me driving that broken-down car. You saw me sitting alone at every family event. And you never once asked if I was okay. There was silence on the line. Then she cried. I listened. Then I told her, I'll give you a chance, but you have to see me. Really see me, for the first time. I took a portion of the recovered money and started a scholarship fund for first-generation college students. Kids who didn't have anyone funding their future. Kids who were told community college was good enough for someone like them. I named it the Earl Weaver Promise Fund. The first recipient was a 19-year-old girl from Henrico County who reminded me so much of my 17-year-old self that I had to leave the award ceremony to cry in the hallway. Grandpa Earl couldn't protect me from the hurt, but he made sure I'd have the proof. And sometimes, the quietest people leave the loudest truth behind. If someone in your family stole what was meant for you, your money, your chance, your dignity, I want to hear about it. You don't have to carry that alone anymore. Drop your story in the comments. That this community is full of people who understand. And if this story hit close to home, click hype to help it reach someone else who needs to hear it today. If you're new here, this channel is for people who survived families that tried to break them. We post stories like this every week. Real pain, real strength, real comebacks. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss one. Share this video with someone who's been counted out. They need to know their chapter isn't over. I'll see you in the next one.